Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to restart a video series that I did a little ways back, which is the Picking the Right Ship videos. Now, if you followed the channel for a while, you'll probably remember these, but since it's been, I think, several years since I've covered this topic, you can really imagine how the landscape has changed quite a bit. Now, since then, we've had new ships that have been added, there's been balance passes, capacitors were introduced, fixed weapons got some aim assist, along with just a ton of other changes. So with all of that in mind, it's basically time to start fresh with the list. Now, since combat tends to be the go-to activity, or at least the more fleshed out gameplay option in the verse right now, we're going to be starting there, looking at picking the right light fighter to get started. Now, in the light fighter category, the way I'm going to be looking at this to help draw a line in the sand is by looking at the ships that all have weapons that are able to be controlled by the pilot, thus essentially single-seat fighters. There is an exception or two on the list, like the Super Hornet, for example, where you can have a turret gunner, but if you don't have a gunner, the pilot controls everything anyways, so adding the turret gunner doesn't actually provide you with a lot of value. So I'm also just looking at the fighter version of a ship if there are variants present. So instead of covering 5 Auroras, for example, we're only going to be looking at the LN, or just the 125A, or just the 325A, etc. Another call out here is that the ships that can fight, but they're not really meant for other roles, that I won't be including. For example, like the M50, the 350, the Blade. These are ships that are more like racers, or maybe could be seen as scouts or interceptors, but they're very, very light. And for like the purpose of picking a more well-rounded fighter, we're excluding them from the conversation because they don't really have that much of a place. The last note before really diving in is really going to be more about removing snubs from the list. Yes, the P-52 and P-72 are very quality fighters, and with some of the changes, the P-72 actually has some of the higher DPS compared to some of the other ships out there. But they are limited in the fact that they lack a quantum drive and require another ship to be able to take them any significant distance, so because of that, we are leaving them off the list. What that leaves us with is still quite a list to break down, which includes a 125A, a 325A, an Aurora, LN, an Arrow, a Buccaneer, a Gladius, a Hawk, a Hornet, a Super Hornet, a Cartual, a Mustang Delta, a Reliant Tiana, the Saber, the Talon Shrike, Avenger Titan. I guess we'll also include the Defender, since it doesn't require the second seat, as well as the Glaive. It is a lot to cover. So what I think I'm going to do here is to plan on covering about half the ships in this first video, and then come back with a second to cover the remainder, and then potentially even a third to get into overall recommendations, depending on how long all these videos take. When I talk about components and hardpoints, though, we need to standardize to some degree, because you can swap out weapon sizes and components to some that work better than others. And ships come stock with different quality of these components. But we need to really just focus on talking about component sizes and totals, and then look at the max hardpoints that you could run if you were to go with a full fixed loadout. And what we'll do is assume laser repeaters to standardize on DPS for a more accurate comparison. Essentially, let's assume we're pimping out every ride to the same degree, and then compare from there. So with all of that out of the way, let's start our list. And I'll provide some details on each individually and some feelings on each. And then, like I said, in a later video, we'll start talking about favorites and best in class at the end. So let's start off by looking at ships that share the same component loadout as far as the numbers are concerned, being the Arrow and the 125A. The 125A is a combat variant of the 100I, which is an entry-level ship luxury made by a luxury ship maker, and it comes in at a cost of $60. The Arrow, which has a price of $75, is one of the lower-priced, more dedicated fighters in the game, which has become kind of a favorite and go-to for many of those that spend a lot of time in-game doing PvP. I've lumped them together because they share one interesting component qualification, which is that they have the exact same kit of one size 1 shield, which is not much. Beyond that, they also have 2 size 1 coolers and 1 size 1 power plant, and with everything on the list, it's the only 2 ships that have those same qualities in mind. With just 1 shield, you have to manage your tactics in a very similar manner, knowing that you have lower shield HP available to protect you, so you need to bow out and re-engage on your terms to avoid getting hit at all costs, because you don't really have the other shield there to help increase your overall shield HP or help with the regen timing. Where things start to differ between these two ships is that the 125A only comes with 2 size 3 hardpoints, meaning that if you went with 2 Panthers from the repeater line, you would have a sustained DPS of 458. Compared to the Arrow, which has 2 size 1 and 2 size 3 hardpoints, giving you a DPS running repeaters at 577. So the damage output on the Arrow is significantly better, which shouldn't be a surprise considering it is a dedicated combat ship from Anvil. The missile capabilities of both are 6 size 2 missiles, which you can customize to your liking with varying capabilities and damage on their own. There are 2 reasons, though, that you don't see anyone fighting in a 125A, or at least picking it over an Arrow. And the first is that the Arrow is vastly more maneuverable and is currently one of the best flying ships in the game, and combined with its very, very small hull, it becomes an incredibly pesky target to land shots on. The Arrow size at 16 long by 12 wide by 4 tall makes it one of the smallest hulls to be able to hit, and can be a nightmare when flown by a skilled pilot. The 125, on the other hand, flies okay, but it doesn't handle even remotely close to the same capacity. Beyond flight model, the Arrow has an overall HP of 9,280 compared to only 2,200 on the 125A, which is a night and day difference. And granted, they have similar body HP, which means that the part of the ship that is focused on just like kind of like the fuselage, for example, if that part takes damage exclusively up to a certain amount, whatever that limit is, the ship will be destroyed before the overall HP has been reached. But when you see the overall HP and sharing of the same shields, you can start seeing the difference between what is a well-rounded luxury ship versus a dedicated Anvil fighter that brings more armor to the fight. Really, comparing these ships is kind of foolish because the Arrow is just so outclassing the 125 that they're not even really peers. But since they were the only 2 on the list that shared the same components with only 1 size 1 shield, I wanted to call them out together. The 125 does have a bed, which allows you to bed log, which is a nice perk, and makes things like delivery missions easier because there's an interior space. But if we're really focused on just pure fighting, there are just much better options out there. That being said, if you're looking for a fighter that's hard to hit, is a blast to fly, has pretty decent firepower, and is always one of the top few ships opted to be flown by some of the best pilots, the Arrow has to be considered. And honestly, is a hard ship to describe without actually having you give it a shot, because there's just something really awesome, kind of intangible, and hard to quantify about the Arrow itself. Now, once we get into the rest of the field, we start finding more consistent results of having more than 1 shield and thus larger shield HP to burn through. Like I normally do, we're going to start in the low price category where we have the Aurora LN, which is the only fighting version of the Aurora starting ship lineup, coming in at a low price of only $40 and honestly far exceeding expectations. You have 2 size 1 shields. Every ship on this list, spoiler alert, has 2 size 1 coolers. So I'm going to stop mentioning the coolers from this point on. And it has 1 size 1 power plant, so there's nothing really special about the component loadout on the LN. Since gameplay balance has changed, there isn't really a drastic difference in weapon sizes for a lot of the weapons. So while the Aurora LN has 2 size 2 and 2 size 1 hardpoints, which doesn't scream amazing fighter, the sustained DPS from repeaters on this build is 561, which is honestly about the midpoint of DPS on the list of ships that we're going to cover, which is obviously a nice surprise from the cheapest option on the list. The LN also comes stock with 4 size 2 missiles, which I would personally keep, but you could potentially swap that out for 2 size 3 or a single size 4 to pack more of a punch from your missile loadout. Overall, the HP on the hull is 6,290, which is second lowest on this list, so durability is not really your friend. And you also have less than 2,000 HP dedicated to both the nose and your body specifically, so it's relatively easy to blow up an Aurora pretty quick with well-placed shots. From a flight perspective, it's pretty clunky. It doesn't look like it would fly like a dream, and it really doesn't. And it's just not going to impress you, though it does remain at least controllable. You should be able to control where you're going because you don't have all the oversteering with, high accelerations. The key when flying an Aurora is to pick your targets effectively and do not allow yourself to get overwhelmed by multiple other targets. And know when you need to bow out to keep your shields healthy, because once they fall, or if you get somebody behind you that you can't shake, that whole HP isn't high enough to sustain for a long period of time. The LN overall is a good starter ship. You can outperform most other low-priced ships, but if you have a deeper wallet, there's just a lot of other options that are going to do you a lot better in the long run. Is it feasible to start here and earn your way up in the game? Absolutely. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best option on the list either. Beyond fighting, though, the LN does have a bed, which a lot of these ships don't, so you can do a bed logout, and you have space behind the cockpit where you can put a box or two for other types of missions, but those are just general value adds versus finding the right combat ship. Up next in the pricing ladder is the Avenger Titan, coming in at $55. The Titan is technically the cargo version of the Avenger line, whereas the Stalker is technically the more combat and bounty hunting focused one. So you're probably like, what's the deal? Well, here's the deal. Where the game stands today, the holding cells on the Stalker are for bounty hunting are just not valuable. We're not capturing people at this point. We're just killing them. And it doesn't take away cargo space, or it does take away cargo space if you want a more versatile ship. So the only real difference between these variants is the default weapons and the price. And since your weapons are customizable to your liking anyways, and they're easy to earn in-game, you may as well save the real money that you would pay on the increase for the Stalker and get the Titan. This is one of my favorite and go-to recommendations for many different categories of ship, and it has been a staple recommendation from me for good reason for years and years. 2 size 1 shields and 1 size 1 power plant. You don't really have anything special there. But the Avenger has a large nose hardpoint, a size 4, along with 2 size 2 hardpoints on each wing, meaning that you have pretty good potential for DPS output coming in at 551, looking at maxing out your repeater sizes. That being said, this will be even more important in the future though, once armor becomes implemented and you require larger weapons to be able to do damage to a larger ship in a meaningful way. Most of the ships don't bring anything larger than a size 3. So having the option for size 4, once that happens, makes a big difference, or at least it should, because you have better penetration values. Missile loadout is kind of average, with the same as the LN. You have 4 size 2s, which you may want to consider swapping a rack for 4 size 1s and 2 size 2s to be able to spam fighters a little bit better in close range. Your whole HP is 11,900, which is on the lower side of kind of middle of the pack. But the bigger issue is the fragility when you start talking about the nose and the body, each of which only has up 2,500 HP assigned to each point. The good news is that the Avenger is agile, and it's pretty quick. So picking your engagement angles and leveraging boost and picking different vectors is helpful to really just kind of keeping your overall effectiveness and survivability high and putting parts of your ship that are starting to take damage at a more favorable position. It doesn't hold up to the agility and responsiveness of like the Arrow and the Gladius, for example, but it's pretty on par with ships like the Buccaneer, and considering the pricing, it's a really well-rounded, capable fighter that tends to perform as you would expect it to. Add to that the fact that it has a ramp and an ability to carry cargo and a bed and 2 ways in and out of the ship, you're looking at a capable fighter that can do multiple things. And the Avenger is a must-consider on any list that I do because it just does everything well. As we move back up the pricing ladder, we get to the Mustang Delta, which is a militia version of the starter lineup, which has a really nice canopy and a cool design with a price tag of $65. The Delta is more cool and unique than a really effective ship. That's kind of my quick and dirty summary. You have 2 size 1 shields and 1 size 1 power plant, which is all perfectly adequate, but the weapons are where things get a little bit interesting. You have 2 size 2 guns on the nose turret, you have 2 size 2 guns on the wings, and then you have 2 size 3 rocket pods. And those rocket pods are cool. And when you look at the overall DPS of the ship, it comes in actually highest on this list at 1073. But that's definitely a little bit misguided, because 502 of that value is all wrapped up in your rockets, which have some questionable effectiveness overall. Their travel time is slow, you have a very small amount of them to use, they're unlikely to hit smaller and faster targets, so you're really more limited to being to using them in close range to larger targets to be able to up your damage output and do what CIG loves to say that ships can do, punch above their weight class. The rocket pods for me, others have reported otherwise, tend to flake out and break from time to time. So I really just don't like using them, not to mention with the ammo pool just being so low, you can't stay out for long periods of time. The durability on the hull is pretty low. Your hull HP is only 8,431, but things get even worse when you see that you have a body HP of only 1,200. And the other parts of this ship the wings, engines, etc., they'll kind of stick off of the ship. And they all tend to break off very easily, which not only impacts your flight model, but things just get worse the more and more falls off. It mostly meaning that you're exposing the kind of core of your ship, the body, where you can actually start taking damage. And when you only have 1200 HP there, it's really easy to destroy the ship. For a starter ship, granted with a higher price tag, it does okay. But once the rocket pods became bespoke, combined with the average acceleration and braking, you end up with a ship that isn't that fast, it's not that agile, it's likely to lose parts, and overall giving you a pretty bad day. There's kind of a redeeming quality there that the armor on the ship is a little bit stealthy, so while it isn't a durable ship, you do have a 10% reduction in your signature as a result of that. So you can get by with being a little bit sneakier, but you also need to opt for stealth components if you're really going to be able to capitalize on that attribute. Overall, cool little ship, but I don't recommend the Delta at all. And there is a very real reason that you don't see anybody flying one in the verse, and that should always be a cue to you. If you don't see anybody using it, it's probably not worth using. So that takes us through at least the starting point and kind of sets the foundation for where we're going to go. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up to make sure the video is not longer than it really needs to be. In the next couple days, I'll have the next section up, which we will be starting with the Origin 325, moving through the list, and then eventually getting to our overall recommendations. So if you have questions or comments about ships I've already discussed, please get them in the comment section. Otherwise, stay tuned for more coming soon. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.